Apple's success story is one of the most fascinating journeys in the history of modern business. A story that begins not in a shiny corporate office, but in a humble garage in California. To understand Apple, we must go back to the 1970s, when two young men, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, were just dreamers. Wozniak was a quiet genius who loved electronics more than anything. He had been fascinated by circuits and machines since childhood, spending countless hours building radios, calculators, and simple computers just for fun. He didn't care much about money or fame. What drove him was the joy of creating something clever that actually worked. Jobs, on the other hand, was different. He was not an engineer. He didn't have the same patience for wires and chips. Instead, he had vision. He could see how technology could touch people's lives in ways most others could not imagine. He loved art, design, and ideas that could change the world. Together, these two very different personalities would shape one of the most powerful companies of all time. The meeting of Jobs and Wozniak was like a spark that set off a fire. They became friends because they shared a love for electronics and a curiosity for how things worked. They would spend hours talking, experimenting, and laughing over little inventions. In 1976, Wozniak built a simple computer circuit board that could be programmed to run basic commands. To him, it was just a fun project, but Jobs immediately saw something bigger. Jobs believed that Wozniak's creation could be sold to hobbyists, schools, and maybe even ordinary people. At that time, computers were enormous machines, locked away in universities or large corporations. Ordinary families didn't dream of owning one. But Jobs was convinced that computers could one day become personal, small enough, and friendly enough to live in a home. This belief that technology should be personal would become the very heart of Apple. Jobs persuaded Wozniak to sell his creation. To raise money, Jobs sold his Volkswagen van, and Wozniak sold his prized Hewlett-Packard calculator. With this sacrifice, they gathered just enough funds to begin. They set up their new company in Jobs' parents' garage in Los Altos, California. It was not glamorous. It was dusty, cramped, and filled with tools and wires. Yet it was in this unlikely place that Apple was born. They named their new company Apple Computer. Jobs chose the name because it sounded simple, friendly, and approachable. He had recently been following a fruit diet and thought Apple sounded fun and different from the cold, technical names of other computer companies. He also liked that it would appear ahead of Atari in the phone book. And so, Apple Computer was officially founded on April 1, 1976. Their first product was the Apple I. It wasn't a full computer like we know today. It was just a circuit board. Buyers had to add their own keyboard, monitor, and case. Still, it was revolutionary. For the first time, a small group of hobbyists could have their very own computer at home. It was priced at $666.66, not for any mysterious reason, but because Wozniak liked repeating numbers. They managed to sell about 200 units, which was a modest start, but enough to give them confidence. More importantly, it showed them there was indeed a market for personal computers, the real breakthrough came with the Apple II in 1977. Unlike the Apple I, this was a complete computer. It came in a plastic case, had a built-in keyboard, and could display color graphics, something almost unheard of at the time. It looked friendly, even stylish, compared to the intimidating machines from competitors. Schools began buying it for classrooms, and families began buying it for their children. Suddenly, Apple was not just a small garage company anymore. It was becoming a serious player in the new computer industry. By 1980, when Apple went public on the stock market, it created more millionaires than almost any other IPO in history. Jobs and Wozniak were now wealthy beyond imagination, and Apple was a household name. But success brought challenges. As the company grew, it became more structured, more corporate. Jobs was still in his mid-20s, brilliant, but sometimes reckless. He was demanding, often harsh with employees, and obsessed with perfection. He wanted Apple to keep pushing boundaries. Wozniak, meanwhile, grew tired of the business side of things and eventually stepped back to pursue other interests. Apple was no longer just two friends tinkering in a garage. It was now a large company with shareholders, executives, and fierce competition. Especially from IBM. Jobs' next dream was to create a computer that was not only powerful, but also beautiful and easy to use. He believed that ordinary people should not need to learn complicated commands to use a computer. Instead, they should interact with a friendly screen, clicking on icons and moving a mouse. This idea led to the development of the Macintosh. Inspired by technology he had seen at Xerox PARC, Jobs envisioned a computer with a graphical user interface, something that looked more like a desktop than a command line. He poured his heart into the Macintosh project, demanding excellence from his team. He pushed them to work nights and weekends, often telling them that they were creating history. Though his methods were intense, he inspired people to achieve what they thought was impossible. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh with a legendary commercial during the Super Bowl. Directed by Ridley Scott, the ad portrayed Apple as a revolutionary force breaking free from the dull conformity represented by IBM. The commercial ended with the promise: on January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. The world was impressed. The Macintosh looked friendly, colorful, and fun compared to other computers. It introduced the mouse to the mainstream and made personal computing far more accessible. However, behind the excitement, problems were brewing. The Macintosh was expensive and, at first, not very powerful. It sold well initially, but could not sustain its momentum. Inside Apple, tensions grew. Leadership style, while visionary, was also divisive. He clashed with John Sculley, the CEO he himself had recruited from Pepsi. The board of directors began to lose confidence in Jobs' ability to manage the company. In 1985, after a bitter power struggle, Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple Vault. very company he had created in his garage less than a decade earlier. For Jobs, it was devastating. Imagine being told you were no longer welcome in the company you built from nothing. But in his own words, being fired from Apple turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to him. It allowed him to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. He went on to start a new computer company called Next. And he also bought a small animation studio that would later become Pixar. Both ventures would play a key role in his future and in Apple's future too. But that is a story for another part. Meanwhile, Apple without Jobs struggled. Wozniak had already stepped back, and now Jobs was gone too. Apple still had strong products like the Macintosh, but competition was fierce. IBM PCs running Microsoft's Windows operating system began to dominate the market. Apple was seen as innovative but expensive, appealing to designers and educators but not to the mass market. The company entered a difficult period. Still, the seeds had been planted. The ideas that Jobs and Wozniak had believed in that computers should be personal, beautiful, and human-friendly were out in the world. They would not disappear, and so, part 1 of Apple's story closes with a dramatic twist. From a garage in California, 2 young dreamers had built a company that shook the world. They created machines that changed how people thought about computers. They became millionaires, inspired a generation, and dared to challenge giants like IBM. Yet by the mid-1980s, one founder had left, the other had stepped back. And Apple's future was uncertain. What lay ahead was a period of struggle, reinvention, and near collapse, but also the seeds of the greatest comeback in business history. Apple's journey had only just begun, and the world had not yet seen its most revolutionary creations. After Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple in 1985, the company entered a strange period. The garage-born startup had turned into a large corporation, but without the fiery vision of Jobs, it struggled to find direction. John Sculley remained as CEO, and for a while, Apple still managed to release products that captured attention. Yet something was missing. The heart and passion that had once driven the company seemed weaker. The Macintosh, though innovative, had not become the massive success that Apple hoped for. Sales were steady in education and design industries, but compared to the explosion of IBM-compatible PCs running Microsoft Windows, Apple's share of the personal computer market began to shrink. Steve Jobs, meanwhile, was not done. Being pushed out of Apple left him devastated, but he refused to quit. In 1985, he founded a new company called Next. His goal was ambitious: to create powerful computers for higher education and business. The Next machines were beautifully designed, with sleek black magnesium cases and advanced software. But they were also incredibly expensive, and few people could afford them. As a business, Next never became a big success. Yet the technology it created, especially its operating system, would later play a huge role in Apple's rebirth. Jobs didn't know it then, but Next was a stepping stone back to the company he had lost. At the same time, Jobs made another move that seemed minor at first, but would change entertainment forever. He purchased a small graphics company from filmmaker George Lucas. The company specialized in computer animation, but it was struggling financially. Jobs bought it for just $10 million and renamed it Pixar. Over time, Pixar shifted from being just a technology company to producing animated films. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first full-length computer-animated movie, and it became a massive hit. Pixar eventually became one of the most successful film studios in history, and Jobs became a billionaire from its success. Though he was no longer at Apple, his influence was still shaping industries in unexpected ways. Back at Apple, the late 1980s and early 1990s were difficult. Without Jobs' relentless vision, the company produced a long line of products, but many were confusing or lacked clear purpose. Models like the Newton, an early attempt at a personal digital assistant, were ahead of their time but failed to capture the market. Apple's product line became cluttered with too many variations, leaving customers confused and profits shrinking. Competitors like Microsoft grew stronger every year, licensing Windows to multiple PC makers and flooding the market with cheaper machines. Apple, by contrast, held tightly to its closed ecosystem, which made its computers more expensive. Slowly, Apple's market share dropped, and the company lost its image as the daring leader of personal computing. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in real trouble. Sales were declining, leadership changed hands multiple times, and analysts began to predict the company's collapse. Some even believed Apple might be sold or simply vanish. Employees described the atmosphere as uncertain and gloomy, far from the excitement of its early years. The once great pioneer of personal computing seemed to be fading into irrelevance. It was during this period of despair that a surprising twist occurred. Steve Jobs returned in 1996. Apple was desperate for new technology to revive its aging Macintosh software. The company decided to acquire Next, the very company Jobs had founded after leaving Apple. With this deal, Jobs returned to the company he had once been forced out of. At first, his role was unclear, but by 1997, he was named interim CEO. For many, it was a moment of poetic justice. The prodigal founder was back, and the company's future now rested in his hands. Jobs immediately set out to simplify and refocus Apple. He cut unnecessary projects, streamlined the product line, and reminded the company of its core vision to make technology that was simple, beautiful, and powerful. One of his first major successes after returning was the launch of the iMac in 1998, designed by Jony Ive, a brilliant industrial designer who would become Jobs' closest creative partner. The iMac was unlike any computer the world had ever seen. It was colorful, fun, and came in a translucent case that showed off its insides. More than just a computer, it was a piece of art that sat proudly on a desk. The iMac became a huge hit, reviving Apple's image as the cool, innovative company once again. But Jobs didn't stop there. He understood that Apple could not simply be another computer company. He saw the future in building an ecosystem: hardware, software, and services all working seamlessly together. He wanted Apple products not only to work well, but to delight users, to make them feel something emotional. This philosophy of blending technology with artistry became the foundation of Apple's comeback. Apple's culture began to change. Under Jobs' leadership, employees described the energy as electric, even intimidating. Jobs was still demanding, still perfectionist, but his passion lit a fire inside the company. He pushed people to think differently, to create not just what was possible, but what seemed impossible. Many nights, teams worked late into the morning, not because they were forced to, but because they believed they were part of something historic. Apple was no longer a sinking ship. It was turning into a rocket preparing for launch. The late 1990s were the rebirth of Apple. But the world had not yet seen the full revolution that Jobs was preparing. The iMac was only the beginning. Soon, Apple would introduce products that would not only save the company, but also change entire industries forever. From music to phones to how we experience the internet, Apple was about to start a second life, one that would surpass even its early dreams. The story of its rise after near collapse is one of the greatest comebacks in business history. After Apple's rebirth in the late 1990s with the colorful iMac, the company was no longer merely surviving. It was preparing to redefine entire industries. Steve Jobs understood that computers alone could not sustain Apple's growth. He saw the potential in creating devices that blended technology, design, and lifestyle. His vision was not just about selling products. It was about creating experiences, products that people would love to use every day and that would change the way they lived, worked, and connected. The first major breakthrough in this new era was the iPod, introduced in 2001. At the time, music was still dominated by CDs. And digital music players existed, but were clunky and unpopular. Jobs wanted something simple, elegant, and easy to use, a device that could hold thousands of songs in your pocket. The first iPod had just a wheel and a small screen, but it was revolutionary. Along with the iTunes software and later the iTunes Store, Apple gave people a complete ecosystem to buy, store, and enjoy music legally. Music lovers around the world embraced it immediately. The iPod was not just a gadget, it was a cultural phenomenon, turning Apple into a company that went far beyond computers with the success of the iPod. Apple had rediscovered its identity as an innovator, but Jobs was not satisfied with dominating music. He wanted to reinvent communication and computing entirely. In 2007, Apple unveiled the iPhone. The iPhone was a bold gamble combining a phone, a music player, and an internet device into one touchscreen gadget. At first, critics were skeptical. Could one device really replace all the gadgets people already owned? Jobs believed it could, and he was right. The iPhone was intuitive, stylish, and powerful. Its touch interface changed how people interacted with technology forever. Phones were no longer just tools for calling or texting. They became windows to the digital world, mini computers in everyone's pocket. The iPhone was only the beginning of Apple's ecosystem. Recognizing the importance of software, Jobs introduced the App Store in 2008. Suddenly, third-party developers could create apps for the iPhone, opening a universe of possibilities. Games, productivity tools, social media platforms, navigation, apps, everything was now accessible in one place. The App Store transformed not only Apple, but the entire software industry, empowering small developers to reach millions of users worldwide. Apple had moved from being a computer company to becoming the center of a new digital ecosystem. Following the iPhone, Apple introduced the iPad in 2010, a device that filled the gap between laptops and smartphones. Critics again questioned the need for such a device, but Jobs' intuition was correct. The iPad became popular in schools, offices, and homes. It was light, portable, and simple to use, allowing people to browse the web, read books, watch movies, and create content in ways that laptops could not match. Apple's product line now included the iMac, MacBooks, iPod, iPhone, Keysa, cohesive family of devices that worked seamlessly together, delivering an experience unmatched by any competitor. Despite these incredible successes, Steve Jobs' health was failing. In 2004, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. He fought the disease privately for years, continuing to work and innovate. Even as his health deteriorated, his vision never wavered. He remained deeply involved in product design, software strategy, and the future of Apple. Employees recalled how he could focus on even the smallest details, from the curve of an icon on the screen to the feel of a device in the hand. Jobs' perfectionism was legendary, and it was one of the reasons Apple products were so loved. They were designed with an obsessive attention to detail that no competitor could match. In 2011, Steve Jobs resigned as CEO, handing the leadership of Apple to Tim Cook, a longtime colleague who had managed Apple's operations with remarkable skill. Jobs remained chairman of the board, but passed away on October 5, 2011. His death was a global event, mourned by millions. The world had lost a visionary, a pioneer, and a man who had reshaped multiple industries: computers, music, mobile phones, and entertainment. Yet his legacy lived on in every Apple product, every innovation, and every design that bore his influence. Under Tim Cook's leadership, Apple continued to grow and innovate, though the challenge was enormous: to maintain the vision and culture that Jobs had instilled. Cook focused on scaling Apple's global presence, improving supply chains, and expanding services such as Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and iCloud. While Jobs had been the creative spark, Cook became the operational genius, ensuring that Apple's innovations reached billions of users worldwide. Today, Apple is not just a technology company, it is a cultural phenomenon influencing fashion, media, education, and entertainment. Its products are admired for their simplicity, beauty, and functionality, and its brand loyalty is among the strongest in history. Apple's journey from a garage in Los Altos, to the pinnacle of global influence, offers many lessons. First, vision matters. Jobs saw possibilities that others could not, from personal computers to portable music to smartphones. He imagined the future before it existed and worked tirelessly to make it real. Second, perseverance is crucial. Faced near bankruptcy in the 1990s, and Jobs faced personal and professional setbacks, yet neither he nor the company gave up. Third, attention to detail and commitment to excellence make a difference. Apple products are loved not only because they work, but because they are beautiful, intuitive, and joyful to use. And finally, innovation is about courage. Jobs and Apple were willing to take risks to defy conventions, and to challenge the status quo. The story of Apple is still unfolding. With the foundation built by Jobs and the continued leadership of Tim Cook, Apple has expanded into new technologies, including augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. Its influence touches billions of lives, and its products continue to inspire creativity, productivity, and connection. From the first Apple I computer built in a garage to the global ecosystem of devices, apps, and services today, Apple's journey demonstrates that vision, creativity, and relentless dedication can transform the world. Apple's success story is not just about a company, it's about ideas, perseverance, and the power of dreaming big. It is a reminder that even the humblest beginnings can lead to unimaginable success, and that innovation combined with courage can leave a legacy that lasts for generations. As we look at the iPhones, iPads, MacBooks, and the software that connects them, we are reminded that Apple did not just make products, it changed the way we live, work, and communicate. The company that began in a small garage continues to shape the future, proving that with vision, determination, and creativity, anything is possible. Apple's story is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. It reminds us that setbacks can be stepping stones, that failure can teach invaluable lessons, and that passion and innovation can transform dreams into reality. From two young men with a vision in a tiny garage to one of the most influential companies in the world, Apple's journey is a story of triumph, revolution, and enduring inspiration. Every device we touch today, every software we open, every song we play, and every app we download carries a piece of that story. Apple's success is more than technology. It is a celebration of imagination, courage, and the belief that one person or one idea can change the world forever.